On Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law screamed at me in front of more than 100 guests gathered inside a luxurious downtown restaurant. "Get out of here and go fix lunch, you useless old woman." I just obeyed. When I finally tried to sit and serve myself, she knocked the plate from my hands and made me clean it up while waiters and diners looked on. I had secretly set aside $40,000 to give to her as a gift. Instead, I handed her an envelope with a photograph that made her collapse on the velvet carpet. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story is going to leave you speechless. My name is Evelyn Grant, and I am 60 years old. I never imagined that at this age I would be kneeling on the floor of a restaurant ballroom, cleaning food off the tiles, while 100 guests stared at me through the golden mirrors on the walls. The crash of porcelain silenced all conversations, and the sound echoed beneath the chandeliers. It had all started as a normal celebration. It was my son Jonathan Hale's 35th birthday, and like every year, his wife, Selena Vega, insisted on hosting a grand party. Of course, I was the one who helped with the preparations, coordinating deliveries, polishing cutlery, and arranging flowers, while she strolled around the dining hall in a designer gown, receiving compliments for an immaculate event she had hardly touched. That morning, I had woken before dawn to supervise the catering trucks and make sure the chef prepared the roasted turkey side dishes and desserts that Jonathan had loved since childhood. My arthritic hands ached after hours of folding napkins, arranging centerpieces, and carrying trays. But I didn't care. It was for my son for family. Selena arrived around noon, glowing in a white silk suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She glanced at me as I organized the kitchen staff and twisted her mouth into that familiar expression of disgust. "Evelyn, I hope you didn't put too much salt in the meat like last time," she said without greeting me. "My friends expect excellence." I swallowed and nodded. I had been living in Jonathan's world for 5 years since my husband's death, and I had learned that responding only made things worse. Jonathan worked endlessly and rarely saw these small humiliations. For him, Selena was an angel who had generously allowed his widowed mother to remain close. Guests began arriving at 2 o'clock. I stayed behind the scenes directing servers, while Selena greeted everyone at the champagne bar. I could hear her crystalline laughter, her charming remarks, the endless compliments about her hospitality. "Jonathan is so lucky to have you," I heard our neighbor Mrs. Henderson say. Selena accepted with false modesty, knowing perfectly well that I was hidden in the background while she basked in the spotlight. When it was finally time to dine, Selena entered the kitchen with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Evelyn, I want you to serve dinner," she commanded. But there was something crueler in her tone than usual. "And please wear this apron. We don't want the guests to confuse you with them." She gestured toward the uniformed waiters. My cheeks burned. The way she said it, as if I were an intruder, instead of the mother of the man being honored, cut me like a knife. I carried plate after plate across the marble floor, my back aching. The guests ate and laughed while I shuffled between the kitchen and the tables. Some smiled politely. Others ignored me entirely as if I were invisible. When I finally sat with my own plate at a side table, Selena swept behind me. She had been drinking wine all afternoon, and her voice had that dangerous edge. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "I'm eating," I mumbled. "Eating here with the guests, Evelyn, please. You know perfectly well your place is in the kitchen." The silence was brutal. I felt the stares of everyone, friends, neighbors, Jonathan's colleagues. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they could hear it. "Get up," she shouted. "Go where you belong, you useless old woman." The word struck harder than a slap. I rose slowly, legs trembling, unable to speak. My throat closed. My eyes burned with tears I refused to shed in front of them. As I passed her with my plate, she deliberately stuck out her foot. I tripped. The dish crashed to the floor, food and china exploding across the tiles. "Look what you did," she screamed, pretending it was my fault. "Clean that mess immediately." I knelt on the cold floor, picking up fragments with trembling fingers. Turkey, mashed potatoes, gravy hours of preparation smeared across the ground. But as I worked, something shifted within me. It was not dramatic, not fiery. It was quiet and cold like frost spreading on glass. I had endured 5 years of this 5 years of being treated like an obstacle in my son's life. That night, after the guests left and Selena retired upstairs to the penthouse suite, I remained in my small, rented room. In my drawer lay an envelope I had saved for years, $40,000 in cash. Money I had once planned to gift Selena for their anniversary, hoping to earn her respect. But now I had other plans. Plans she would never expect. The truth had begun weeks earlier when I had spotted her leaving a downtown hotel with a man who was definitely not my son. His name was Adrian Navarro, Jonathan's best friend since college. The sight of them embracing beside his red sports car had confirmed what my heart already knew. My daughter-in-law was betraying my son, and his closest friend was her accomplice. I started collecting evidence, overheard phone calls, photographs taken from a distance, even messages glimpsed on her unlocked phone. The words made me sick, mocking Jonathan, as naive, laughing at his devotion, boasting about how easy it was to drain his money. They had been planning everything for years, but soon I realized there was more. With trembling hands, I hired Leonard Briggs, a private investigator who operated from a cramped office above a bakery. He uncovered her true identity. Selena Vega was really Carmen Valdez, wanted in Nevada for marital fraud. She'd married multiple men, emptied their accounts, vanished with Adrian's help. And when she found Jonathan wealthy and trusting, she stayed. Together, they had already siphoned $250,000 into offshore accounts. Even worse, Briggs discovered an old case in Arizona involving a young woman who disappeared after threatening to expose Carmen and Adrian. My blood ran cold. These were not just liars and thieves. They might be far darker. I knew then I had to act with precision. The perfect chance arrived when Selena announced she wanted to host a special dinner at the same restaurant to celebrate Jonathan's promotion. She invited a dozen influential guests, neighbors, business partners, and of course Adrian. She expected me to stay hidden in the kitchen unseen. But I had prepared an envelope not with money, but with truth photographs, records, and documents certified by the investigator. That Saturday night, the chandeliers sparkled. The tables gleamed, and everyone toasted to Jonathan's success. Selena stood to raise her glass, praising her wonderful husband and their dear friend Adrian. She glanced at me with that icy smirk, daring me to accept humiliation once again. But this time, I did not bow. I stepped forward, removed my apron, and spoke clearly. "Selena, I think there's something you should see." The room froze. Jonathan looked confused. Adrian paled. Selena faltered. I placed the envelope in her hand. This was meant to be $40,000. Instead, it is something far more valuable. She opened it. The first photograph slipped out her and Adrian in a compromising embrace outside the hotel that very afternoon. Gasps rippled through the room. Selena's face drained of color. She staggered. What is this? Keep looking," I said calmly. Inside were marriage certificates, police reports, and bank transfers, proof that Selena Vega was Carmen Valdez, a con artist and bigamist. Jonathan's hands shook as he read. The woman collapsed to the floor of the elegant restaurant, and the grand party dissolved into stunned silence. And that was only the beginning. The restaurant had never been so silent. Chandeliers that moments ago glittered above laughter now seemed to tremble under the weight of stunned silence. Forks froze in mid-air, wine glasses quivered in guests' hands, and all eyes turned toward the woman who had just collapsed, clutching a white envelope as if it had burned her. That woman was Selena Vega, my daughter-in-law. To everyone else in the room, she was flawless, elegant, magnetic, admired. But to me, Evelyn Grant, she was a predator. For 5 years, I had endured her condescension, her humiliations, her cruel little games that turned my life into servitude. I had remained silent not because I was weak, but because I was waiting. And tonight, in front of 100 witnesses, the silence shattered. Selena's cry when she saw the photograph echoed through the entire banquet hall, bouncing off marble walls and golden mirrors. It was not the cry of a victim. It was the cry of a predator, caught in her own trap. Guests gasped, chairs scraped back, and even the pianist in the corner stopped playing. In the stillness that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like a war drum. My son, Jonathan Hale, sat frozen beside her. He had always believed her to be the woman of his dreams, generous, loyal, sophisticated. Now he stared at the image of her locked in an embrace with his best friend, Adrian Navarro, taken only hours before at a downtown hotel. His eyes widened, his lips parted, and then nothing. No words, only shock so deep it hollowed the room. The scene unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Selena dropped the envelope, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. The contents spilled across the white linen tablecloth, documents, certified records, photos. Every guest could see the truth bleeding out in black and white. A police report from Nevada, a marriage certificate with another man's name, financial transfers to accounts Jonathan never knew existed. It was as if lightning had struck the heart of the gathering. One moment, the restaurant was alive with congratulations and praise for Selena's impeccable hosting. The next, it was a graveyard of illusions. I felt the weight of 5 years of humiliation lift from my shoulders. For years, I had been the invisible servant in my own son's life. She had called me useless, made me clean floors, dismissed me in front of neighbors. But tonight, under the crystal lights of that ballroom, she was the one stripped bare. Still, shock rippled through me as well. I had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, but the reality was overwhelming. Seeing Jonathan's face, his disbelief, his heartbreak was like being pierced with a blade. My body shook, not with fear, but with the enormity of the moment. Selena gasped, tried to speak, but no words came. Adrian, usually so confident, turned pale as chalk. His chair screeched against the floor as he stood, but the eyes of every guest pinned him in place. The room had become a courtroom, and the evidence lay scattered before them. And then something unexpected happened, that new element that no one, not even I, had foreseen. A woman rose from one of the tables near the back. She was elegantly dressed, a guest I didn't recognize, perhaps invited by one of Jonathan's colleagues. But the moment her eyes locked on the documents, her face drained of color. "I know her," the woman whispered, her voice carrying in the silence. "That's not Selena Vega. That's Carmen Valdez. She tried to scam my brother in Arizona 12 years ago." The gasp that followed was louder than any applause I had ever heard in that hall. Heads whipped back and forth between Selena and the stranger, and for the first time, Selena's mask cracked completely. "No," she screamed, her voice jagged with panic. "That's a lie." But the woman stepped closer, her voice steady now. "I testified against her once. She disappeared before the trial, and now here she is, again, under a new name." The revelation fell like a second thunderbolt. Guests murmured, some horrified others, whispering accusations. Jonathan turned to his wife, No, to the stranger sitting beside him, and asked the question that sliced through the noise. "Who are you?" Selena's lips quivered. For the first time, her eyes darted toward me, full of hatred and terror. She knew the game was over. She had controlled every room she walked into, every conversation, every gesture. But not this one. Not tonight. I remained silent, letting the documents speak for themselves. The evidence was undeniable, but now it had been reinforced by a living witness, someone from her past she had never expected to face. The walls of her lies closed in tighter and tighter until there was no escape. The restaurant staff, unsure of what to do, stood frozen at the edges of the room. A waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes trembled so hard that one glass toppled, shattering on the floor. The sharp sound was like a gavel striking. Judgment had been delivered. Jonathan finally pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against marble seemed deafening in the silence. He stood tall, but I saw the storm raging inside him. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet. For 35 years I had watched my son grow into a man, but in this moment I saw him break and then begin to rebuild in the same breath. He looked at Selena, at Adrian, then at me. For a heartbeat, I feared he would collapse under the weight of betrayal, but instead he straightened his voice, shaking yet strong. "Get out." He told Adrian, his words low but commanding. "And you," he turned to Selena, his wife of 7 years, "you tell me the truth right now. Who are you really?" Selena could no longer pretend. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes darted wildly, and the truth spilled from her lips in a trembling whisper. "My name is Carmen Valdez." The air vanished from the room. Some guests gasped, others muttered prayers under their breath. The elegant restaurant had transformed into the stage of a tragedy more real than anything they had ever seen. I watched, torn between vindication and sorrow. The predator had been unmasked, but the cost was my son's shattered heart. And yet in the stillness I knew this was only the beginning. The path to justice had been opened, and nothing would ever be the same again. And now, dear listener, let me ask you something simple. If you had been sitting in that restaurant witnessing a daughter-in-law unmasked before your very eyes, would you have stood frozen in silence, or would you have spoken out? Press 0 for silence. Press 1 if you would have spoken. The moment the name Carmen Valdez left Selena's trembling lips, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Shock had been the first wave. Now came something far more powerful, an eruption of fury and justice. It was as if the chandeliers themselves trembled in righteous anger. For years she had worn the mask of Selena Vega, dazzling neighbors, charming friends, fooling even my son. But now, with her confession hanging in the air, the mask shattered. What remained was a criminal, a con artist, a fraud, a thief of both money and trust. Jonathan's hands shook as he gathered the scattered documents from the table. His voice, though broken with grief, rang like a verdict. "You lied to me, to all of us. 7 years of lies." Selena Carmen tried to reach for his arm. "Jonathan, please, I can explain." "No," he cut her off, his voice rising like a hammer striking steel. "You will not explain. You will listen. For the first time in years, you will listen." Guests leaned forward, unable to look away. I stood near the corner, silent, letting my son's fury rise. It was the fury I had long prayed. He would find the fury of a man betrayed, but no longer blinded. And then the new element emerged. The stranger from Arizona, the woman who had stood moments earlier, pulled out her phone. "I still have the case file," she announced. "My brother kept every record after Carmen vanished before trial. Police reports, sworn testimony, everything." She showed Jonathan the screen. His face hardened as he scrolled through documents that confirmed every dark truth. The whispers of the guests grew louder, angrier. This was no longer gossip. This was a tribunal, and justice was roaring to life. Adrian Navarro tried to step forward, raising his hands as if to calm the storm. "Jonathan, listen. I never meant what Jonathan thundered." His voice boomed across the hall. "Never meant to stab me in the back. Never meant to steal my wife, my money, my life." Adrian paled, but Jonathan advanced, his fury unstoppable. He slammed the photograph on the table, the one of Adrian and Selena at the hotel. "You were my brother, my best friend. And all this time, you were nothing but a vulture circling above me, waiting to feed." The room erupted. Guests murmured their outrage. Some shouted curses. Others demanded the police be called immediately. The weight of truth was no longer a whisper, but a roar. Selena collapsed in her chair, her face twisted, mascara streaking. Adrian backed away, sweat shining on his brow. For the first time in years, I felt something inside me ignite, something like freedom. This was not just a personal victory. This was the fire of liberation burning away years of humiliation. Jonathan turned to me. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "Thank you. You saved me." Tears stung my eyes. I had endured so much to reach this moment, 5 years of silence, waiting, collecting evidence. Now, watching my son rise in righteous fury, I felt the weight lift from my chest. But the battle was not finished. Police arrived within 20 minutes, called by one of the horrified guests. 2 uniformed officers entered the glittering dining hall, their presence slicing through the chaos. "We've had reports of fraud and identity theft," one of them said. "Who is Carmen Valdez?" Selena buried her face in her hands. Jonathan pointed his voice steady. "She is." The officers approached her. The sight of handcuffs flashing beneath the chandeliers sent shivers down spines. Selena shrieked, tried to stand, but the officers forced her arms behind her back. "This is a mistake. He set me up," she cried, glaring at me with venom. But I did not flinch. I met her gaze with calm steel. The only mistake was underestimating a mother's resolve. The guests burst into applause, not polite applause, but thunderous clapping that rattled the very walls. They weren't just clapping for Jonathan. They were clapping for truth, for justice, for every silent parent who had ever endured cruelty for the sake of their child. And yet, amid the victory, I felt the tension coil. Adrian had slipped away during the commotion. One moment he was by the table, the next he was gone, vanishing through the side doors like the coward he was. The officers led Selena through the restaurant. As the doors closed behind them, I knew this was far from over. Adrian was still out there, dangerous, calculating, and I had no doubt he would strike again. That night, Jonathan and I sat in the quiet of our small kitchen. The adrenaline had faded, leaving exhaustion in its place. He leaned across the table, his hands gripping mine. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved me from years more of her lies." I squeezed his hands. "Justice saved you, Jonathan. And justice isn't finished yet." Because I knew what he did not. In my drawer at home, hidden beneath a stack of old letters, lay something Leonard Briggs, the private investigator, had given me, a flash drive containing proof of offshore accounts and connections that stretched far beyond what Jonathan had seen tonight. And on that drive was evidence implicating Adrian as the true mastermind behind several schemes. The fire of justice was not just a spark anymore. It was a wildfire, and it would not stop until every predator was exposed. As I tell you this story now, I can't help but think of all the tales I've read online, the ones where ordinary people rise up against cruelty and deceit. This moment belongs in the same league as those Reddit revenge stories that make your pulse race. Only this time, it was my family, my son, my life. And unlike some of those Reddit revenge stories that end in uncertainty, mine is only just beginning. The blaze of truth is still burning. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in a restaurant full of witnesses, in a trembling hand, holding an envelope, in a mother who refuses to stay silent. That is what separates fantasy from reality. This isn't just another of those Reddit revenge stories. This is flesh and blood. The night closed with silence, but not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a battlefield after victory, when the enemy has been struck down and the survivors stand breathing in the air of freedom. Yet even in that silence, I could feel the shadow of Adrian Navarro moving somewhere in the city, plotting his next move. And I knew with chilling certainty the fire of justice had only begun to spread. The applause that shook the restaurant walls had barely faded when the storm truly began. Selena Carmen was escorted away in handcuffs, her shrieks echoing down the corridor like the cries of a wild animal caught in a trap. Yet, even as the police let her out, I knew this was far from finished, because Adrian Navarro was still free. That night, Jonathan and I returned home, the weight of revelation still pressing against our chests. But the victory we thought we had gained dissolved by morning. At 7 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood grim-faced. Mrs. Grant, one of them said we need to speak with you. Selena Vega Carmen Valdez has filed a complaint against you. She claims you falsified evidence and threatened her life. Jonathan exploded. That's insane. You saw the documents, the photos, the witnesses. The officer raised a hand. We know, but procedure requires us to investigate. She has powerful attorneys working already, and just like that, the flame of victory flickered. Hours later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Leonard Briggs, the private investigator. His voice was urgent. Evelyn, be careful. Carmen has contacts in places you wouldn't believe. Judges, lawyers, even a detective in Nevada. Adrian's helping her from the shadows. They're trying to flip the story to make you the villain. My blood ran cold. I had expected her to lash out, but not like this. The next week turned into a battlefield. Carmen's lawyers filed motions claiming the photographs were doctored, the bank records fabricated. She painted herself as the victim of a bitter old mother who couldn't accept her son's wife. Newspapers picked it up. Businessman's wife. Accuses mother-in-law of harassment, one headline blared. In church, neighbors avoided my eyes. At the grocery store, I overheard whispers. Some believed her. Others pitied me. The humiliation that I thought I had left behind returned sharper than ever. Jonathan tried to protect me, but I could see the exhaustion carving lines into his face. He worked all day, met with lawyers at night, and slept barely at all. The stress was eating him alive. And then came the new element I had not expected a recording. One evening, Leonard called again. Check your email, now. I opened the file he sent. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Voices filled the room. Carmen's voice sharp, furious. Adrian's voice mocking. We'll bury her, Carmen hissed. That old woman won't know what hit her. Adrian laughed. Jonathan will fold. He always folds. We'll make it look like she invented everything. Once she's gone, the house, the money, everything will still be ours. My breath caught. Proof. Actual proof of their conspiracy recorded only days earlier. Leonard explained that he had tapped into a call by tracing one of Adrian's burner phones. It's risky evidence, but it's real, and it's enough to push back. That night, Jonathan listened to the recording 3 times. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. They won't win, he swore. Not this time. Not ever again. But Carmen was not going down quietly. A week later, she appeared in court for her bail hearing. I'll never forget the sight. She walked in wearing a pristine white dress, her hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. To the untrained eye, she looked like a woman unjustly accused, a saint among sinners. And then she saw me. Her mask slipped. She glared, eyes burning with hatred, lips curling into a snarl. And when the judge denied her request for reduced bail, she screamed. Not words screams. High, wild, piercing. The courtroom erupted in chaos as officers restrained her, dragging her out while she kicked and clawed. It was the scream of desperation of a predator losing control. I shivered as it echoed through the marble halls. But Adrian was still at large. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every car parked across the street felt like a spy. One night, as I locked the back door, I spotted a figure across the lawn, tall, broad-shouldered, watching. By the time Jonathan ran outside, the figure was gone. But I knew. Adrian was circling, waiting, planning. The tension inside our home thickened. Jonathan slept with a baseball bat near his bed. I kept the lights on in the hallway. We were living in a siege. And yet amid the terror we held on. Because we had the recording. Proof that would destroy their lies. Proof that justice was still on our side. I often thought in those sleepless nights about all the stories people share online, ordinary families facing extraordinary betrayals, the kind of tales that sound unbelievable until you realize how true they are. My life had become one of those Reddit family tales, full of pain rage and the desperate fight for survival. But unlike some of those Reddit family tales that end in tragedy, I prayed ours would end in justice. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. Jonathan had just returned from a meeting with our lawyer, Judith Spencer, when the power went out. the house plunged into darkness. I froze, my heart pounding. Through the kitchen window, I saw a shadow moving toward the door. Jonathan grabbed the bat. "Stay behind me!" The doorknob rattled. A heavy fist pounded once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice, muffled but unmistakable, Adrian's. "Jonathan, open up, we need to talk." His tone was urgent, almost frantic, but there was something in it, a crack, a desperation I had never heard before. Jonathan shouted back, "You've got nothing to say to us, Silence." Then a low laugh. "You think you've won. You think this is over. She'll destroy you, Jonathan. And when she does, I'll be there to finish it." The pounding stopped. The shadow vanished into the rain. We stood in the dark, trembling, knowing the battle was far from over. But in that silence, I also knew something else. The storm had reached its peak. The predator was cornered, wounded, and desperate. And desperate predators are the most dangerous of all. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about survival. The night Adrian pounded on our door had left its mark like frostbite on the skin. Even after he vanished into the rain, his words lingered, poisoning the air. "She'll destroy you, Jonathan. And when she does, I'll be there to finish it." I barely slept, my mind circling those words like a vulture. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise sharpened with hatred. And I knew predators like Adrian, they didn't bluff. The next morning, Jonathan tried to be strong. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched. "He won't scare us," he said, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But I saw the tremor in his hand as he lifted the mug. I saw the darkness under his eyes. My son was unraveling little by little under the weight of betrayal and terror. By noon, the phone rang. I answered, expecting our lawyer. Instead, a distorted voice hissed into my ear. "You think you've won, old woman!" The voice crackled, but I recognized it immediately. "Selena, you took everything from me. I'll make sure you die alone in some rotten corner, forgotten by your son. You belong in the dirt." The line went dead before I could reply. I stood frozen, the phone pressed against my ear long after the call had ended. My stomach turned to ice. She was behind bars, yet somehow her threats reached into our kitchen as if she stood right beside me. When I told Jonathan, he exploded with fury. "She called you from jail." He grabbed his coat. "I'm going to the police. This ends now." But even the police could offer little comfort. They explained that inmates sometimes found ways to smuggle phones into holding cells, that Carmen Salinas still had allies. They promised to investigate, but their words felt hollow. The danger was real, pressing, and close. That evening, a new element appeared, one that twisted the knife deeper. Our lawyer, Judith Spencer, arrived with news. She spread papers across the kitchen table, her face grave. "Jonathan Evelyn, you need to see this," she said. "Carmen's legal team has filed a motion to seize your house." What? Jonathan's voice cracked. "She claims the property was purchased during the marriage, and therefore she has legal rights to it. With Adrian helping from the outside, they're arguing you both fabricated evidence to frame her." I felt the blood drain from my face. The house. The home Jonathan and I had fought to protect. The place where I had raised him, where his father's memory still lingered in every corner. The thought of losing it sent a chill so deep it reached my bones. Jonathan slammed his fist on the table. "It's lies, all of it." Judith nodded. "Of course it is. But lies, if repeated enough, can wear people down. That's what they're counting on. They want to make you feel powerless, broken." And broken was exactly how I felt. That night, I walked through the rooms of our house, touching the walls, the photographs, the small keepsakes of a life built over decades. For the first time, I felt them slipping through my fingers. The home was no longer safe. It was a battlefield. Jonathan found me standing in the hallway staring at a framed picture of him as a boy. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I brought her into our lives. I let her poison everything." Tears blurred my vision. "You didn't know, Jonathan. She fooled us all. But the real crime is how much she's still controlling us, even from a cell." The days that followed felt like living under a glacier. Every phone call, every letter from the court carried another threat. Carmen's allies leaked false stories to the local press, painting Jonathan as a negligent husband, me as a manipulative mother-in-law. Strangers on the street looked at us with suspicion. It was a slow, cold suffocation. The laughter had vanished from our home. Meals were silent, conversations brief. Jonathan withdrew into himself, and I fought to keep my own spirit from collapsing entirely. But the collapse came in a single moment. One evening, I returned from the grocery store to find Jonathan sitting at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands. Spread before him were letters, final notices from banks, accounts frozen, assets questioned. It was as if Carmen's icy fingers still gripped every part of our lives. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice hollow. "Everywhere I turn, she's there. Even locked away, she's winning." His words cut through me worse than any of Carmen's threats. My son, the man I had raised with love and sacrifice, was breaking apart before my eyes. I placed my hand on his shoulder, though my own heart was crumbling. "You are stronger than her lies, stronger than him. We both are." But inside, I wasn't sure. That night, I dreamed of the house collapsing around us. Walls, crumbling photographs, burning voices, whispering threats in the darkness. When I woke drenched in sweat, I realized the dream was not far from reality, because Carmen and Adrian were not just attacking us legally or financially. They were attacking our very sense of self. They wanted us hollow, brittle, shattered, and it was working. The next day, Leonard Briggs arrived with updates from his investigation. He set down a folder, his expression grim. "Evelyn," he said, "I've uncovered something bigger. Adrian has been moving money through offshore accounts, millions, not just thousands. And Carmen was his partner the whole time. They're not just con artists. They're part of a network." Jonathan's eyes widened. "A network," Leonard nodded. "Other victims, other families destroyed. This isn't just about you, it's about stopping them before they leave more lives in ruins." The weight of his words pressed down like ice. The battle had grown larger than our family. As I looked at Jonathan, pale and weary, I felt both fear and resolve. Fear because the threats were growing colder, sharper, more dangerous. Resolve because now we knew this wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a war. And wars once begun do not end until one side is completely shattered. For weeks, the house had been gripped by shadows. Fear, silence, the echo of threats. But the day Leonard Briggs revealed the existence of Adrian's network, something shifted. It was as if we finally saw the storm for what it was, not just an attack on us, but a pattern that had destroyed other families. And knowing that truth sparked a strange, radiant clarity inside me. Healing doesn't always arrive as a whisper. Sometimes it bursts in like sunlight breaking through after a storm. That night, Jonathan sat across from me at the kitchen table. The fatigue on his face was heavy, but his eyes were steadier than they had been in weeks. "Mom," he said softly, "I can't keep letting them win. Not like this. They want us broken. They want us afraid. But if what Leonard says is true, we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for others too." I reached across the table, taking his hand. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of strength between us, as if our bond had been reforged in fire. "Then let's fight together," I told him, "not just to survive, to end this." The next morning, Judith Spencer arrived with new documents. "I have good news," she said, her sharp eyes glittering. "The court has rejected Carmen's motion to seize the house. The evidence Leonard provided that she was still married to another man during her marriage to Jonathan was enough to block her claim. This house is safe." Relief washed over me like cool water. The icy grip of despair loosened. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply. Jonathan closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." But the healing didn't stop there. The very next day, something remarkable happened. Our new element. Letters began arriving at the house. Not threats this time, but testimonies. Strangers, families from Nevada, Arizona, and even California who'd been scammed by Carmen and Adrian reached out after hearing whispers of our case in the news. They wrote of marriages destroyed, savings, stolen, trust, shattered. And in their words, I saw reflections of our own pain. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Angela Martinez, who had lost her brother to despair after Carmen and Adrian drained his accounts. I thought no one would ever hold them accountable, she wrote. But now I see you standing up to them. You've given me hope again. I read those words aloud to Jonathan, my voice trembling. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. We're not alone, Mom. We never were. The effect was transformative. What had once been a private war of survival now became a crusade. Families connected with us shared their stories, and suddenly the burden felt lighter. The wounds still ached, but they began to heal in the warmth of solidarity. For the first time in years, laughter returned to our kitchen. Jonathan started cooking again, trying his hand at the dishes his father used to love. I enrolled in an art class at the community center, something I had always dreamed of but never dared while living under Carmen's shadow. Small steps, perhaps, but each one felt like a victory, a reclaiming of life. We no longer whispered in fear. We spoke openly, boldly about what had been done to us. And the more we spoke, the more others spoke too. Each voice was like a stone cast into still water, sending ripples of truth outward. The healing was not just within our walls, it was between us. One evening, Jonathan sat with me on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in gold and crimson. Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I need to tell you something I've never said. For years, I let Carmen treat you terribly. I saw it, I knew it, and I looked away because I didn't want to face the truth. I abandoned you. My throat tightened. The wound of those years had cut deep, but in his words and his confession, I felt the wound begin to close. You didn't abandon me, I whispered. You were blind, yes. But love makes us blind. What matters is that you see now, and that you're here. He pulled me into an embrace, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt pure, radiant healing flood through me. The bond between mother and son, battered but unbroken, had become stronger than ever. In those weeks, serenity began to return. The house felt alive again. Flowers bloomed in the yard, laughter echoed through the rooms. The fire of hatred and betrayal had burned nearly everything, but now the water of peace was washing it clean. But peace is never permanent when predators still roam free. Adrian remained out there, circling like a wolf denied its prey. Reports came from Leonard that Adrian was making desperate moves, shifting money, contacting old allies. The net was closing, but like any trapped animal, he was dangerous. Still, I no longer felt powerless. Healing had given us strength, connection had given us courage, and serenity had given us clarity. I often thought of Angela Martinez's letter and the others like it. We were no longer just victims, we were survivors standing tall in the light. The lies that had once suffocated us had been burned away, and in their place truth stood like a lighthouse guiding others through their storms. And yet, even as healing flowed through us, I knew the final confrontation was coming. Carmen's trial was approaching Adrian's schemes, unraveling. The predators were cornered, and soon they would lash out with everything they had left. But this time we were ready. Not broken, not hollow, not afraid. Ready. Because when blood has been washed away by water, what remains is not weakness. It is strength, radiant and unshakable. The storm that had consumed our lives for so long finally began to fade. After months of fear, betrayal, and battles in courts and in our very hearts, a new dawn broke over our home. And this time, it was not fragile or fleeting. It was brilliant hope, Choi Loa, warm as sunlight pouring through every window. Carmen Valdez, once parading as Selena Vega, was found guilty of marital fraud, identity theft, and financial conspiracy. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. But in that silence, I heard something louder than any applause, the crumbling of the walls she had built on lies. For the first time in years, I looked at her and felt nothing but release. No rage, no fear, only peace. Adrian Navarro, cornered by his own greed, fell soon after. Leonard Briggs' investigation uncovered the offshore accounts, the fraudulent transfers, the other victims. With every document, every testimony, the net closed tighter. When the FBI finally arrested him, I watched the news with a calm I hadn't known in years. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had lost everything. And yet the greatest victory was not in courtrooms or headlines. It was inside our home. Jonathan and I no longer walked in silence. The weight of betrayal had been replaced with laughter, conversation, and the simple joy of living without fear. I often caught him smiling again, small smiles at first, then bigger ones like the boy I had raised. He cooked meals, invited friends we hadn't seen in years, and even began talking about his future in ways he hadn't dared when he lived under Carmen's shadow. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees painting the sky in gold and violet, Jonathan said to me, "Mom, I feel alive again. I thought I'd lost everything. But now I see I never lost you. And with you by my side, I can rebuild anything." Tears blurred my vision, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. Our bond, once fractured, now shone brighter than ever. The healing that had begun with letters from strangers now grew into something larger. Families across states reached out to us, sharing their own struggles with betrayal, fraud, and heartbreak. We were no longer just two survivors. We had become part of a community of resilience. Together, our voices formed a chorus that drowned out the silence predators like Carmen and Adrian had thrived on. And that was the greatest lesson of all, that even in the darkest nights, hope is not extinguished. It waits patient and steady for someone to strike the first match of truth. Life slowly returned to its gentle rhythm. I redecorated my room not to erase memories, but to celebrate new ones. Jonathan planted flowers in the yard, bright blooms that reached toward the sun as if they too were rejoicing in freedom. On Sundays, we gathered with friends for dinners filled with laughter and warmth. Sometimes Sarah, the nurse Jonathan had begun seeing, joined us. She treated me not as a burden, but as family. Watching her and Jonathan together, I felt something deep inside me heal. After years of falsehood, here was something genuine, steady, and kind. There were moments when I would step outside at night, gaze up at the stars, and feel as if the universe itself had opened. The peace was not small or narrow, it was vast, radiant, cosmic. The fire of betrayal had been washed clean, leaving behind serenity as endless as the night sky. And yet I knew the scars would remain. Healing does not erase the past, it transforms it. Every humiliation I had endured, every tear I had shed, had brought me here to this moment of hope, of warmth, of boundless peace. To you, dear listener, I want to say this: never believe you are powerless. No matter how dark the night, no matter how cruel the betrayal, there is always a path forward. Sometimes it begins with silence, with endurance. Sometimes it bursts with confrontation. But always, always it ends with truth. Betrayal may wound deeply, but it cannot destroy the soul that refuses to give in. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is choosing to rise, even when fear tries to chain you down. And love the love between a mother and her child, between friends, between all who stand for truth. Love is the fire that no predator can extinguish. Jonathan once asked me if I regretted exposing Carmen the way I did. I told him no. Because while it shattered illusions, it also revealed truth. And truth, even when painful, is the foundation of real healing. Now, as I sit in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, I feel a gratitude beyond words. Gratitude for survival. Gratitude for renewal. Gratitude for hope that shines as brightly as the stars above. And to you listening to my story, I offer the same hope. Whatever battles you face, whatever storms rage in your life, know this dawn will come. And when it does, it will not just break the darkness, it will flood your world with light. Justice may be delayed, but it is never silent. Healing is possible even after the deepest wounds. And love, real enduring love, is the light that guides us home. Thank you truly for staying with me through this journey. If my story touched your heart, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Type your thoughts, share your own experiences. I read every word. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and truth. And if you believe in hope, in love, and justice, then join me here again. On the screen, you'll see 2 more life stories waiting for you. They too are filled with lessons, with heart, with courage. Don't miss them. Auntie May 365 Voice. And I'll see you in the next video.